Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast. Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Waiting List podcast, where I, Daniel, am joined today with my co-hosts, the tree-hugging Jacqueline and the selfie-loving Lung Lung. Now that we have finally woken up from our slumber after interviewing Jack Hu in our previous episode, we are raring to go with another collector from Shanghai Watch Gang, Eric. So welcome, Eric, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me.
Welcome, Eric.
Welcome.
Oh,
Right. So before I do these interviews as a host, the process is that I'll privately interview the guest beforehand so that I can formulate the questions for the actual interview that the audience listens to. And this is like super useful most of the time because it allows me to build a connection with the interviewee so that they don't feel so nervous about coming along and we aren't starting off cold, and also allows me to basically get to know somebody. So when I was doing Eric, I thought, oh, I know him well enough. I'll just figure out some minor things and, off we go and we'll be done. Nope. I was completely wrong. I was completely surprised by your story. And actually, the week I made you that private call and we went into your life, I did like a few other collectors as well. And every time when I thought I knew somebody, they came up with a story that just blew me away. And out of every single interview that I thought I have a good relationship with somebody, I came out with such huge respect, more than I did before. So yeah, without further ado, I think we should get into it.
okay.
Right. So since I'm the only one who kind of knows you on this show, even to the supporting co-hosts, and I'm sure the audience don't know who you are, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you grew up, a little bit of background so that they can identify with you?
Okay. Well, my name's Eric Heise. I'm an actor. I lived in Shanghai for 13 years, but I just moved to Hong Kong about a month ago. And I am a fanatical vintage watch collector. I love vintage watches. And a lot of that has to do with my growing up in America. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, and briefly in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in Switzerland. When I was a boy, my family moved to Switzerland when I was 12 years old. We lived there for 2 years. And so I was exposed to Europe and watch culture there. And, growing up, we didn't have digital watches. All we had were, basically manual wind mechanical watches. And that's mostly what I collect because that's what we had, For me, it's like really comforting to wind a mechanical watch because that's what we did. And I'm an unusual collector because I never shop online. I have to find it in sort of a brick and mortar situation. I shop mostly at flea markets and junk shops and watch shops. I walk for my exercise and find my watches that way. And I use them in my work.
Right. So there's one thing I want to address, because one thing I noticed very early when I met you was that you're a very level-headed individual and you're very balanced in your perspectives. Like even when you were living in China for a Lao Wai, for an expat,
right?
You seem very open-minded to Chinese culture, very respectful. And I don't mean respectful in a way where actually I think my country is better than you, but I'm just going to be polite. I actually genuinely thought that coming from inside, you've always been very open-minded, and I was fascinated by that. So, where during a time right now where there's a lot of animosity towards China because you're from the US, I was wondering, what was your childhood like growing up for you to be able to develop this kind of innate, really openness? And what were your parents like, and what did they do?
Well, my parents came from very poor backgrounds, actually, but were able to succeed through education. My father served in the Army, and my parents met at Georgetown University. They were devout Catholics, and they were both at the School of Foreign Service, which is a very prestigious school. Bill Clinton went there. And my mother was the third woman admitted to Georgetown University. And that's actually a pretty big deal.
Wow.
And my father wanted to serve in the government. He wanted to be a diplomat, and got that education and spent a career doing that. But they were very idealistic people and very involved in civil rights movement in the 60s and protest against the Vietnam War. And so I kind of grew up, singing folk songs and going to anti-war protests and things. And then moving to Switzerland in the mid-70s, where I was exposed to a totally different culture. So my parents raised me to be a colorblind person, to be an open-minded person, to intellectualize analyses and take life as it comes. And that's, I think that served me pretty well in my life and in my work as an actor.
That's great.
I want to ask something.
Sure.
Yep, go for it.
Okay. You mentioned that you lived in Cambridge for a little bit. Whereabouts
Yes.
did you live around?
Well, when I was 10, my dad got a sabbatical leave from the government to get a master's degree at the Kennedy School at Harvard.
Right.
And so we lived in just off Massachusetts Avenue on
Right.
Arlington Street
Right.
in Cambridge.
Yeah. So I
And
wanted to ask because were there any, you were probably really young at the time, but
Yes.
did you notice did you notice like any of the old vintage watch shops there? Because when I'm like living there now and there's only one left near Mass Ave, and then I
Right.
used to go in like every weekend, and then the guy who the older gentleman who used to work there said that there used to be a lot of vintage like shops around that area, but because throughout the years Harvard has bought all the property around the area for academic uses, a lot of the shops were forced to leave. Yeah.
Right. Well, all I remember, I have two memories of Cambridge and watches when I was 10 years old. And when I was a kid, I was very hard on watches. I was a very active boy. I was always destroying them. And I was always late. And it bugged my dad. So he took me across Mass Avenue to the Sears store. And he bought me an alarm watch, which was a pretty cool thing. It would go bzzz. And it worked. It kept me on time. And it really got me interested in watches. I also remember I had another watch that was very, very difficult to repair. And it just cost a fortune in repairs. And this was a problem with me growing up was watch repair in my country is very expensive. And the watchmakers can be extremely unpleasant. And so it was, they would treat me like a virus when I came in just to get a crystal replaced. And it was one of the reasons I never collected watches growing up. I would just sort of get them, use them as timepieces. I wanted to collect them and all, but it was just too much trouble. And that was one of the things that started me in as a collector. It was in China. The service is very reasonable. They do a great job, and they're very cheerful and friendly and geniuses with the repair of these old machines. So that was a big help, actually, for me as a collector, was moving to China.
Yeah, actually, talking about that, I was on a call with Wostep. So do you guys know Wostep? Well, Wostep is the watchmaking school that is basically based in HQ'd in Switzerland, and they basically outsource it around the world. So they produce the course, and then they have a standardization of watchmaking. So they have like an 1800-hour course, and then that'll take you to X amount of level, and then the higher course takes you actually, I think, up to chronograph level and that kind of thing, right? Now, Wostep was founded something, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I'll just roughly say, I think it was 1967 or maybe 1965, right? Something like that. Post-war, Um, and it was founded as a request, actually, from the American government because they were lacking in watchmakers of suitable like level of standard. And
Right.
so they spoke to the Swiss government. So this WOS step, the core people in it are the Swiss government, Paddock, AP, LVMH now, Richemont, and Swatch, and I think another group. Yeah, so that was formulated, and yeah, that was the reason. So that would make total sense that, you know, watches would be very expensive to repair because there weren't that many people who could do it, and then obviously people who are rare obviously are very expensive as well.
Yeah.
But talking about this, you know, probably due to Trump's previous trade war and, you know, his presidency, the spotlight has been placed on the two different systems between the US and China, right? And I always think that, you know, I get that question a lot, even in China, from Chinese people about, you know, what it's like to live in the West, democracy, all that kind of stuff. And I always think, yeah, I'm quite qualified to say it because, you know, I grew up in the West, I'm born there, but then I've actually lived and worked in Shanghai, right? So I actually have lived and breathed both systems rather than just reading it on paper. But then you're probably one of those rare individuals where I think also you are very qualified to say, because, you know, you know the system very well in the US. That's where you were born and raised. But you spent 14 years in Shanghai in a very critical time of where Shanghai was really, or China as a whole, was going through great transition. So what I'd like to hear from you, or like to ask you, is what is your take on it? You know, between the two systems, the advantages, the disadvantages, what it really is like in China, you know, what it really is like in the US,
Right.
having spent such considerable time there.
Well, that's a really good question. And
Thanks.
the important thing to remember is I didn't know what to expect when I moved to China. I had never set foot on mainland China. I'd spent 6 months in the Philippines on a consulting gig doing video production. But, you know, all I had to go on in my mind was, you know, the images from the ping pong diplomacy. I thought that everybody in China, you know, wore blue jackets and hats and waved red books and rode bicycles. And I tried to do a little research. You know, I said, what's Shanghai like? And they said, it's like New York with a big Chinatown. And you know, that's kind of true. It's a big modern city. And I arrived in the fall of 2007 and was just amazed. I was just captivated by the place. It has changed a lot since then. And originally I was teaching in universities and then got more involved in acting. I'd been a sound mixer, did sound recording in America, but they didn't need me for sound. They needed this, you know, to play the bad guy in Chinese TV series, which I love to do. It's always more fun to play the bad guy. The villain is fun. The hero is boring. It was a very strange culture for me. The language has always been very difficult for me. You know, you move to some place when you're older, it's very hard to learn the language. But I've tried, and the Chinese have been very, very welcoming to me and very helpful. And I had a really great time all my years in China, and now in Hong Kong. I've just moved here to Hong Kong, and I'm exploring it and having a great time here.
So, what were your impressions? When we know what you felt like before you went there. When you first landed in your first year, what were your impressions then? Because I think, you know, you have a more limited understanding of it. And then compare that to, you know, probably like a couple of months ago where you actually left. What were your takeaways from Shanghai?
Boy, it's I could spend all day talking about it. It was very, very strange at first. You know, the language has always been the biggest barrier for me. But, you know, there was these surprising things that happened to me. You know, I remember my first day I landed and I was jet lagged, and I just said, I'm going to walk. And I walked all the way across Shanghai to the Bund. And it was fascinating because I realized that I could go anywhere. as a Westerner. They would just wave me through security. I walked into somebody's wedding. I could walk into any building and just go, hello.
Yeah.
And people used to stare at me a lot. They don't so much anymore, but they was on the subway like, I think Westerners are a little more common now than they were back then. But I've really watched the city grow and expand. I've always loved exploring Shanghai on foot, and Shanghai is a great place to walk because there's something fascinating around every corner. And I used to go to a place called Dongtailu, which was an antiques market. And I noticed there were all these watches said Shanghai on them. I said, well, that's cool. They made them here. I want to learn about this. And I bought a few and I tried to find out about them. And nobody seemed to have any information. My Chinese students would see me wearing this Shanghai watch and they'd say, why are you wearing an old man's watch? Because that's what they associated with. But before I was in show business, I was a professional historian. I was an archaeologist, a museum educator, a tour guide, and a journalist, and involved in history. And as an archaeologist, we're what we call a material culture historian. We believe that objects contain meaning. They convey meaning. They tell you stories about the people who made them and owned them. And I was desperate to find out about these Shanghai watches. And I went online and I found this wacky Canadian guy named Ron Good. And I told him, I feel like I'm alone in the world. I'm this solitary freak. Nobody has this interest that I have. And he says, oh, no, you're not alone. And, and he sort of gently introduced me to watch collecting and in China. He has a museum in Canada. I actually introduced him to the watch gang. And I started learning the story of the Shanghai watches and all of the Chinese watches. It's absolutely fascinating. The history is rich and deep and broad and tells you a lot about the evolution of China in the modern age. And walking for exercise, I started finding more watches and I started restoring them for my work as an actor. And this is an important thing I want to mention is when you make a movie, everything's fake. I'm fake. I'm playing somebody I'm not. I want to have one thing that's real. If I'm shooting a scene in 1949, I'm going to wear my 1949 Bulova Director because that's going to help drag me into that moment and try to become that person. It's actually difficult to become somebody else. And actually very unhealthy, but that's another story. Actors can go crazy because you're not supposed to pretend to be somebody else.
Dan has Shanghai watch, right?
Yeah. I have one. It was actually found by Eric.
Oh,
so we're gonna go on this. So
that's a story.
That is a story. But actually, you kind of did answer my next question because I was going to bring attention to the fact that you graduated in French and archaeology. And because I do feel that is the basis of your interest in watches and how you collect. Right. So what fascinated you about history and when did you realize you had a really deep interest in it as a kid? Because you can't say all kids are interested in history, right? So what was it that got you?
My parents always had an interest in history. When we were kids, we were always touring historical sites, and we got to Europe and traveled around and visited castles and things. It was very difficult for my father to find a house that was large enough for us to live in. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. So Swiss families just aren't that big. So we had to rent a 14th century monastery on Lake Geneva, built on Roman ruins. It was a grand place to live, let me tell you, for a 12-year-old American boy. From my bedroom, I could see the Mont Blanc, the tallest mountain in Europe. I could see the Jet d'eau, the famous water fountain in Geneva. I went to school at the International School of Geneva, the oldest, largest, richest international school, invented the International Baccalaureate program. Every morning driving to school, I would pass the huge factories of the watches and drive by the famous flower clock twice a day. And so I was drawn into the history of Europe and history of watchmaking. It was fascinating. My father was always interested.
I think, you know, if you were a history teacher, if you would be my history teacher, maybe I would have fucking done history.
Yeah, me too. I was just thinking that.
You like just make it sound like this is a difference between people who do something that they're passionate about, right? And you just feel the passion coming through everything. The own excitement you find in not just telling the story, but hey, did you know this part that I found out? You know, like this part, not just so you go off the core history and you find this stuff which actually you know the listener will think, or the student thinks that no, they're going to find this part interesting, this little small thing that actually doesn't matter, but you're going to still find it interesting. I think you're such a great advocate for history, because I've sat there with you on many G2Gs, and I've just because for everybody, this is, you know, we can see each other on the call, and I'm seeing it with Jacqueline and Long Long. They're just sitting there like this with their eyes listening, just mesmerized by what you're saying.
When you said the 14th century monastery built on Roman ruins, I was like, oh my God, because I am a sucker for like ancient ruins. I am a sucker for lost cities, because it's there, but you don't know what happened, and you see it and you can only use your imagination. And that's why every time I go to Europe, I make time to backpack alone to these old towns if I can, and I bike in cornfields, because I just feel so just you can feel the ambiance of the history of the old town, and something you can't feel in a metropolitan area. So when you said that and how you can see the chateau, and I was just like, bring me there, because that's just like hearing it and not even seeing it. You can see it with your imagination, but the way that you described it, it was amazing.
Well, you know, people love history. You know, you all were at the Shanghai Watch Festival in 2019, right?
Was it 2019? Oh my God, it's 2019. Wow.
It was in December. It was at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
But, you know, Daniel and Kelvin asked me to contribute watches for the history timeline. And it was kind of a fun challenge, because I didn't have a lot of space for each of the decades, and so I had to pick good representative examples of the watches to show the evolution in this timeline, which is a great idea. And apparently they did audience surveys, and the top scoring
section
exhibit of the whole festival was the timeline. And if you looked at the people, you looked at the people going through, they were fascinated. They were, you know, reading these nice interpretive panels that Daniel had written, and looking at my watches and really getting into it. So Oreo's going crazy here. Oreo, come here. Right here.
That's
Tug
so
on
cool,
this.
Dan.
He's lost his
That's
ball,
so
so
cool.
now he's going crazy. But it was a lot of fun, and it was so great to see, you know, parents showing their children, okay, look at these old Shanghai watches. This is what we used to have. And it was great. It was a lot of fun.
Right. So, like, you've spent time as a teacher in Shanghai, and actually you spent, well, I don't think you were a teacher, but you kind of like spent a lot of time touring probably young students, you know, in Washington and other places, and explaining about the history of your own country. What do you think about like the two attitudes to US parenting and Chinese parenting? You know, because you clearly, you had the option to really focus and really, your parents almost like, they imprinted they gave you that exposure to history. You subsequently loved it. And then you went to pursue it, and you graduated in French and archaeology. You subsequently went to France, and then you you were on these sites. I'm just not sure how much support you'd get from Chinese parents. So what do you feel about those kind of systems?
Well, I think that Chinese parents all want their kids to succeed, and they want them to have a well-rounded education. I was a teacher. I taught at a couple of universities in Shanghai, and I had excellent students, by the way. They were really, really great kids, and I've actually kept in contact with some of them, which is great. But I don't know. I think different cultures do have different attitudes towards history and material culture, the things that we find. China is an interesting place because it's got 5,000 years of history, but not a lot of historical sites. All the structures were what are called earth-fast structures. You put a post in the hole, you put a hole in the ground, you put a post in it, the wood, and build the building around it. What happens to the building? It's going to fall down. It's going to rot. Mm-hmm. So there's I think maybe a lack of interesting historical sites compared to America. Our history is a lot newer, and we can go to places that might have a strong connection to our family, like say a Civil War battlefield or something. And that's what I did growing up. My parents were fascinated with that sort of stuff and loved antiques. We go, buying antiques and things. So I don't know. I could just maybe just talk about my own fascination and upbringing, maybe better than the Chinese.
So, Longling, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Eric's upbringing isn't actually a good representation of like the general the general type of parenting in the U.S. Because if you actually think about it, I think I could be super wrong about this, but I feel like most U.S. parents are still very close-minded. So I would actually think that Eric was the small percentage of people where both parents were very vested into education. They themselves were very educated. So therefore like open-minded and then encouraged this. Yeah.
So you think Eric around. Is more the not part of the mainstream, but he's actually one of the minority?
I don't think so.
What would you say, Eric, to that?
Yeah.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think that all people are interested in history. Mm-hmm. You can't generalize too much. I mean, what was the most popular thing at the Watch Festival? It was the History Timeline. Mm-hmm. We beat Patek Philippe. We beat the Phillips Auction House in popularity. So while people, you could say, oh, people are all just, involved in shopping and what's current and interesting. They want to have an idea of heritage and history and culture and background as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's because we did the history wall and the brands did their own thing. Okay, enough said about that. But your career pathway, Eric, has been very varied. You graduated with that degree in French and archaeology, as we said, and you ended up in what at the time you thought was your dream job, which was working in a museum.
Right.
But very quickly, you realized it wasn't what you had thought it was going to be.
Right.
What was it that you found out that, made you think this wasn't what it was? What was it like, in essence, to have that dream you had been working for so many years shattered and then trying to find a new direction in your life again?
It was hard. I worked as an archaeologist and I just got sick of spending my days on my knees in the dirt. So I said, well, I'm finding these objects to put in museums. I'll just work in the museum. It'll be great. Every day I'll have the joy of discovery that I had going to museums when I was a kid. So I spent 3 years getting a master's degree in museum education and worked in museums, and I hated it. Okay. They say, be careful what you wish for because you might get it. That was very true for me. Museums are very political places. And imagine trying to teach the same lesson over and over and over again. You just can't recreate that excitement of the first visit after, if you've done it 1,000 times. And I was very disillusioned, but I had a friend who was in the student travel business, and he said, "Come work for me. You can work in all the museums. You don't have to work for any one of them, and you make more money." And I said, "Sure, sounds great." And it was great. Unfortunately, it was very seasonal. And there were times of the year when I would starve. So, but in the fall of 1998, a friend of mine knew that I had a background in video production. I made my master's thesis project was an instructional video for a museum in the Caribbean on a little island called St. Eustatius. And she said, "Look, I'm a freelance camera person. Come and help me haul my gear and I'll feed you." I said, "Sure, I'll work for food." And we went out on just what happened to be the day the Starr Report was released, that detailed all of the relationship between Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And Washington, D.C. went from Monica crazy to Monica completely insane. I had a paying job the next day with a very famous broadcaster, Joan London. 2 weeks later, I was a sound technician for the Associated Press in the briefing room of the White House. And I'll tell you, for a historian to, be sitting between two walls built by Thomas Jefferson, watching history happen right in front of my face, that was a real treat. And I worked in the U.S. Capitol as well. I knew Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and all these people because I would record the committee meetings, and got into documentary style production. I worked for Discovery Television and many other news organizations. Eventually became events video producer. I loved that work, but 9/11 kind of killed that whole business in my hometown, Washington, D.C., and moved to Hollywood for 5 years. And I've always had a fascination with Hollywood history. So that was just a real treat as well. And I got to be I was just a background actor, but I got to act in all these great shows like The West Wing and Malcolm in the Middle, and all, with some of my heroes, I growing up as actors. It was an incredible opportunity there. And we lived there for 5 years and moved to Shanghai in 2007. I did my first TV series.
Sorry, Eric, just to cut you through, because I didn't want to cut you because it was a good story, but
right.
There was part of it where even when I spoke to you on the previous call,
right,
you said it in a kind of nonchalant and dismissive way, and you thought I would have known about it. And I'm not sure if the two girls here also would have felt it as well, was where you said museums are very political. Like, because when I go to a museum, I just think, I'm going to look at history. Yeah. Right. And when you said it's political, I was like, what do you mean it's political?
Okay.
So could you expand on that? Yeah.
Right. Museums are expensive places to set up and operate.
Yeah.
And so what they wind up being is shrines to the major donors. For example,
shrines.
I'm serious. No, that's it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's Colonial Williamsburg, where I worked. John D. Rockefeller bought the whole town and restored it, but he restored it, sort of as a monument to himself, and a monument to the time before the American Revolution, before there was democracy. So he was making a very political statement in doing that. So, if you look at it, the way it was restored really tells you more about the colonial revival period of the 1950s than of the history of the 1750s that it's supposed to be portraying. And so because these are shrines, the people who work in them are the people of the cloth. And if you are not of the cloth, if you're not of that religious persuasion, you are not welcome. It's very political and practically a religion.
Right. Okay. So you did actually detail the fact that, you from archaeology ending up in the briefing room of the White House, you had a new, and you've also mentioned you're a teacher in Shanghai.
Yeah.
You've had a very colorful career. Which
Yes.
was your favorite job out of all of it, and why?
That's a really good question.
Thanks.
People, I've had so many careers, I can't remember them all. All right. And some of them I really enjoyed, some of them I really hated. Oh, hang on. Oreo's going crazy here again. He's lost his toy. What did you do with your toy, Oreo? Find your toy. Okay. You know what's really exciting to me is getting in front of a camera. We say that in the business that everything else is just existing. We live for those moments when we're in front of that big black shark eye and trying to become somebody else. And it's a real challenge because, my language skills are poor. I'm constantly having to guess what they expect of me. And, production moves very fast. They don't have a lot of time to tell me. And I've got to just do it. And it gets the heart going. I remember the first press conference I did at the White House. Boy, you're going out live. There's no second take. It's an exciting business. And so is acting, and getting to work with creative people, and getting to try to make something entertaining that's going to tell a great story. It's tough. When I did Wohu de Jiashang, I didn't think it was going to be the #1 movie in the world. I didn't think it was going to make $1.5 billion RMB in a week. I just came in and did my doctor thing, and they sent me home, and then they called me and they said, "Oh, Eric, can you come back? We had an actor freak out. We need you to do his role." And I had 10 minutes to learn all this complicated medical terminology and do it with the big director who was acting in the scene. And 10 minutes, learn the lines, action, Junbei Heise. And that's a challenge. That's a thrill. And it's a lot of fun. It's something I live for. Okay.
Right. So, Eric, did you ever have a plan in life? And also, would you have done anything differently? So did you have any plan in your life, and basically any regrets?
Well, I always wanted to work in entertainment, and my parents, being very responsible, mature people, said, "Don't do it. You can't do it." They forbid me to do it, made me agree that I wouldn't. And I don't blame them for trying to be responsible parents. Okay. And at the time, the entertainment business was a very, very different business. And hang on, Oreo is going crazy here. I've got to get his ball, or he's going to go out of his furry mind. Where is it? Oreo, where did you lose it? You crazy dog. Okay, I've got another of his toys. Hopefully this will keep him entertained here. I kind of fell into it by accident. My friend said, "Carry my gear and I'll feed you." Ironically enough, she fed me Chinese food. Here, come on, Oreo, come here. Oreo, grab this. Good dog. And it's been a real adventure ever since. If you do what you love what you do. And that's what I tell young people, is try to find something that you're good at, that you enjoy, so that you can wake up in the morning and say, I get to go to work. This is fun. That's a lucky person. That's a lucky person. Somebody who can say, I love my work. I want to go to work.
Yep, go Lung.
Between you doing your last job and offering you the job, what made your friend even say, "I'm going to offer this guy this job"? Like, what were you must have been giving off some kind of vibe that you didn't enjoy what you were doing. And like, how did it happen? How did she ask?
Well, she was actually a tenant of mine. I was managing a building for my dad. But we were close friends, and she knew that for one thing, it was the fall when there was no work in the student travel business. Students don't travel in the fall. And she said, Eric, you're not doing anything. Come and help me. You know, my friends have been the ones who've helped me in life. When I came to Shanghai, I knew this girl, she was a model. And she said, you know, Eric, they need your face in these TV series. They need you to be an actor. And I said, really? She said, yeah, really. And she hooked me up with the agents. And I've been able to return the favor. I've gotten a lot of people started in the business. I hook them up with the agents and tell them how the business works. And now they put a roof over their head and food on the table for their families because of that. And I'm very proud of that. But you have to be open in life. You have to have a sense of adventure, and you have to try to do something that you love.
Okay.
I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
I think I know I kind of get what Long Long was trying to ask, but really what it is that, yeah, you couldn't predict it. Like it's not like he prepared for anything. It's just fortune kind of shone. He went for it. You know, I'm sure his life would, if you say no to stuff and you don't do stuff and you don't really know where, you know, you think so far ahead and you think I'm not going to get anything from that, and you don't end up doing anything, you never know where you could have gone, because you can never predict life.
That's right. Doors open and you either walk through it or you don't. And you either go and knock on the door sometimes or you don't.
Yeah, that's very true. So did you have any regrets with your life?
Oh gee, some, but not enough to mention.
Right. Okay. So now, you know, you obviously had so many changes with your career.
Yeah.
What were some of the hard times that you went through? What were the most difficult times? How did you get through them?
Oh gee. Well, I remember one time I accepted a glorified extra role on a terrible movie called Animal World, and the conditions were awful. Were really, really awful. The food was inedible. The studio we were working in was blisteringly hot. And but I got through it just by hanging out with my friends, and it was you know, we always say it's fun to do creative work, but it's hard work. You know, it is work. It is show business. Emphasis on the business. And we are a commodity. I tell people when I get them into acting is that it is the business of exploitation. You know, we're pieces of meat to these people who are trying to make something as a business. And the conditions can be very, very hard. So you've got to love it. You've got to be pretty resilient just to get through the tough days.
I mean, it was like, it's what you're saying is very similar to what Miles Fisher said in his interview, and how he felt as an actor, and the way that the industry works. It resonates very closely to what you said. And yeah, so I believe it is like
you have
that
you have to be thick-skinned.
Yeah.
You know, I knew a really good-looking actor who went into an audition in Hollywood, and one of the producers turns to somebody else at the table and says, "I thought we were supposed to get some good-looking people in here." They said that right in front of this guy. Okay. And you know, not with no care at all that it would have any effect on his self-esteem or anything else. You know, but you have to be thick-skinned. You have to be able to deal with rejection. You know, there's a lot of snobbery in watch collecting. You know,
yeah, that's very true.
You go to these groups on Facebook. You know, I got a pole rooter, and I joined the pole rooter group, and I put my watch up there, and I was very proud of it. I got it for a really great deal. It's a good looking watch. And he said, you know, and it has a repainted dial, which I knew when I bought it. And it didn't bother me because it was a really, really great price and a great watch with fascinating history. The pole rooter is an amazing, amazing watch. And some guy in the group said, you know, why didn't you just save up your money and buy a nice watch? I'm serious. You know, why would you put that in a watch festival? You know, it's not a good example of what these are.
Okay.
You know, and
Anyway, we would like to save the watch questions for the next interview.
okay.
Right. So we're going to finish off on like one last question, and you might have answered it in your previous question, but what lessons in life have you learned and that you would like to pass on to some of our younger listeners?
Well, like I said, do what you love and you'll love what you do. Follow your dreams, but be careful. The gypsies have a curse. May all your wishes come true. Sometimes what you want is the absolute worst thing. I found that out the hard way working in museums, but it all came out okay in the long run. You got to be patient and just follow your bliss, follow your dreams.
So a further question from that, how did you find what you want to do?
Well, you got to find what you're good at. You know, when I was a young person, internships weren't such a thing. These days, kids can do internships and get really great experience and discover if they like something, more importantly, if they're any good at it. You know, I think my advice to young people is do an internship, do as many of as you possibly can. When I was growing up, they just weren't as broadly done.
Right. Well, that was my final question. So we will get into your watches and what they mean to you, which will be covered in part 2 of this interview. So on behalf of the team, I'd like to say thank you for participating. I hope you had fun. I'm sure you did. You always do. Did you?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm a ham. I love to perform. You have to want to perform to be a performer.
I actually have a really quick question because like people listening, they can't see Eric, right? But Eric has very deep dimples, and then you're always playing the villain, right? So how do you like overcome this whole like having dimples and like you look super friendly?
That's the trick. A confidence man gains your confidence, and then he cheats you. Okay? The real villains are the ones you don't suspect.
That is true.
God, that's almost true in life as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Playing a villain is a fun and a complex thing, you know, because people don't allow themselves to be cheated if they see it coming, right?
Right. So that really is the end. So Eric, since you're an actor, I normally do the ending and say goodbye to everybody. Do you want to do it?
Sure. Well, thank you all for joining the broadcast here. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you tune in next time.
Okay, guys. See you on the next one.
Thank you.
We had fun. Hope you had fun too.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List Podcast.